My sons watched my name flash across their phones for 3 straight days and deliberately refused to answer. But I didn't know that yet. At 2 in the morning, I was sitting on the edge of my bed, convinced one of them might be dead. My name is Gary Cooper. I was 52, owner of Anvil Biomed in Ohio. And until that week, I believed the worst thing an adult child could do was disappoint you. I was about to learn there were cruelties far quieter than that. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're listening from today. It began with something ordinary. My oldest son, Harry, lived in a luxury apartment in Miami, and his lease was coming up for renewal. Years earlier, when his finances weren't strong enough to qualify a loan, I had guaranteed it. The property manager needed updated information, so Monday morning I called Harry. No answer. I texted him. Nothing. I wasn't worried. Harry was 30 years old and busy with his own business. By Monday evening, however, 4 calls had gone unanswered. Tuesday morning I tried again. Voicemail. That afternoon I called my younger son, Darren, because the brothers spoke regularly. He didn't answer either. I texted, "Have you heard from Harry?" Nothing. That was when irritation became uneasiness. By Tuesday night, Kate noticed me checking my phone every few minutes. We'd been married 28 years, and she knew when something was bothering me. "They're probably busy," she said. "Both of them?" I asked. Wednesday morning arrived without a single message. I called Harry's office. Nobody could tell me where he was. I checked Miami accident reports online, then hospital information, feeling ridiculous until I remembered that neither son had answered Kate either. She rarely called them, unless it mattered. Still nothing. I left Harry another voicemail. "Forget the lease, son. Just tell us you're okay." Then I called Darren. "Your mother and I are worried. Call us." Silence. I had lost my own father when I was young. Maybe that's why my mind went immediately to places I couldn't control. A wreck on some Florida highway, an emergency room, Harry unconscious somewhere while his phone sat broken beside him. I had spent my adult life trying to make sure my sons never experienced the uncertainty I grew up with. I built a successful company, helped with apartments, vehicles, and business financing. And whenever either boy fell, I made certain there was something beneath him. Yet now, with all the resources I had accumulated, I couldn't answer the simplest question a father could ask. Were my children safe? At 1:47 Thursday morning, I woke and grabbed my phone. Nothing. Kate was awake beside me. "Still no word?" I shook my head. She reached for my hand. "Gary, this isn't normal anymore." Those words settled it. I went downstairs and called Harry again. Voicemail. Darren, voicemail. I stood in our dark kitchen, listening to the refrigerator hum, feeling more helpless than I had in decades. 3 days. Dozens of calls between Kate and me. Not one response. At 2:06 a.m., I opened my laptop and searched flights from Cleveland to Miami. The first available seats left shortly after 6. Kate came downstairs and saw what I was doing. "You're going?" she asked. "We're going." "What about the company?" "The company can survive without me for a day." She stared at the screen. "What if they're fine?" I looked at the 2 unanswered message threads on my phone. "Then I'll gladly look like an overprotective idiot." I closed the laptop. "But if something happened and we stayed here because we were afraid of embarrassing ourselves, I'll never forgive myself." Kate didn't argue. She walked toward the stairs. I caught her hand before she could leave. "Pack one bag." She nodded. For the first time, I saw the same fear in her eyes that had been growing in mine for 3 days. I picked up my keys and looked once more at my silent phone. Somewhere nearly 1,000 miles away were the 2 boys I had spent half my life protecting, and I had no idea whether they needed me. What I didn't know was that Harry and Darren were perfectly safe. They had seen our calls. They knew exactly how frightened their mother and I were becoming, and while Kate packed for Miami, my sons were making a deliberate choice not to answer. "Let's go," I said. "Something is wrong." The entire flight to Miami, I prepared myself to find something terrible. I pictured police officers outside Harry's building, an unanswered door, maybe a hospital room where one of my sons had been lying while Kate and I called again and again. Kate held my hand but barely spoke. Every 20 minutes she checked her phone. Nothing from Harry. Nothing from Darren. When we landed shortly after 2, The Florida heat hit us the moment we stepped outside. I rented a Navigator and drove straight toward Brickell. Kate kept trying to reassure both of us. "They're probably fine, Gary. There has to be an explanation." I wanted to believe her, but 3 days of silence had already poisoned every reasonable explanation I could invent. Harry's building rose above Biscayne Bay in glass and steel. Exactly the kind of place a young man could afford only because someone else's credit had helped open the door. I handed the rental to the valet and followed Kate into the lobby. Neither of us mentioned that my name was still guaranteeing the apartment 14 floors above us. Inside the elevator, Kate reached for my hand again. "Whatever we find, we handle it together." I nodded. When the doors opened on 14, my heart was beating so hard I could hear it. We walked down the corridor toward Harry's unit. Then I stopped. Balloons were tied beside his door. Music thumped faintly through the wall. A burst of laughter came from inside, followed by glasses clinking and someone shouting Harry's name. For half a second, relief hit me so hard my knees almost weakened. "Thank God," Kate whispered. "They're okay." She smiled through tears. I should have felt the same way. Instead, another thought arrived immediately. If Harry was here, laughing with enough people to throw a party, why hadn't he answered once? I knocked. The music continued. I knocked again, harder. When steps approached, the lock turned, and Harry opened the door holding a drink. His face told me everything before his mouth did. There was surprise, but no relief, no concern. No son seeing parents who had flown nearly 1,000 miles because they feared for his life. His smile simply disappeared. "What are you guys doing here?" Kate stepped forward before I could answer. "Oh, thank God." She reached toward him. "Harry, we've been calling for 3 days. We thought something happened. We thought you might be hurt." Harry didn't hug her. He didn't apologize. He rolled his eyes. "We didn't answer because we didn't want to talk to you." Kate's hands slowly dropped. I stared at him. "What?" "You heard me, Dad. You call constantly. You check on everything. It's exhausting." I felt the fear I'd carried from Ohio begin changing into something colder. "I was calling about your lease. The renewal deadline is tomorrow. I needed one piece of information because I'm still the guarantor." Harry gave a short laugh. "Of course. There's always some reason you need to check on me." Before I could respond, a young woman appeared beside him holding a glass of pink champagne. I'd never seen her before. She looked from Kate to me with obvious irritation. "Harry, are these your parents?" Kate blinked. "And you are?" The woman smiled and raised her left hand. A diamond ring caught the hallway light. "Haley, his fiancée." I looked at Harry. Kate went completely still beside me. "Fiancée?" she whispered. Haley nodded toward the crowded apartment behind them. "This is our engagement party." Then her smile disappeared. "Which you weren't invited to." Behind her, I could see balloons, champagne bottles, trays of food, and people turning toward the doorway to watch. My son was alive. He was healthy. He was engaged. And while his mother and I had spent 3 nights imagining him dead beside some Florida highway, he had been preparing a celebration we weren't supposed to know existed. Then another familiar face appeared behind the guests. Darren, my younger son, looked directly at us, and instead of surprise, his face tightened with annoyance. In that instant, the final possibility of misunderstanding vanished. Both my sons were here. Both had their phones. Both knew we had been calling. Darren set down the tray in his hands and groaned. "Seriously? You flew all the way down here?" I looked from one son to the other, and finally understood that we hadn't traveled 1,000 miles to rescue anyone. We had traveled 1,000 miles to discover why our own children had decided they no longer wanted us in their lives. Darren folded his arms as if Kate and I were the ones who owed him an explanation. "You seriously flew from Ohio because we didn't answer a few calls?" "A few calls." I looked at Kate and saw the relief she'd felt seconds earlier disappearing from her face. "We thought something happened to you," she said. 3 days, Darren." Neither of you answered. He shrugged. "We're adults, Mom. We don't have to report every move we make." Harry leaned against the doorway beside Haley. "That's what we've been trying to get Dad to understand for years." I kept my voice level. "I wasn't tracking you. Your lease renewal expires tomorrow. I'm the guarantor. The property manager needed information from you." Harry laughed. "See? This is exactly what I'm talking about. There's always a reason for you to be involved. My signature is the reason you have this apartment." The words came out before I could stop them. Harry's expression hardened. "And there it is. You always do that. You help us, then act like it gives you the right to control us." I stared at him. I'd never asked for rent. I'd never demanded repayment for the deposits, emergencies, or business expenses I'd covered. To me, helping my sons had always been part of being their father. Apparently, to them, every safety net I'd provided had become evidence against me. Darren stepped closer. "You want the truth? We both chose schools far from home because we needed space from you." Kate flinched. "Darren." "No, Mom. He needs to hear it." He looked directly at me. "You call, you fix things nobody asked you to fix. You show up with solutions before anyone even asks for help. It's suffocating." I could have argued. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. "Did you see our calls?" Neither answered. "Harry, did you see me calling?" His jaw tightened. "Yes." Something inside me went still. "And Darren?" "Yes," Kate whispered. "You knew we were worried?" Harry sighed as if she were making the conversation unnecessarily difficult. "We figured you'd eventually get the message." "What message?" I asked. He looked straight at me. "That we wanted you to leave us alone." I felt Kate's fingers tighten around mine. "So every time your mother called," I said slowly, "you saw her name?" Darren looked away. Harry didn't. "Yes." "Every voicemail?" "Yes." "And you deliberately didn't answer?" Harry took a drink. "We wanted to see how long it would take before you finally stopped." That hurt more than anything he'd said so far. They hadn't forgotten. They hadn't been busy. For 3 nights, I'd pictured twisted metal and hospital beds while my sons watched my name illuminate their screens and decided my fear was useful. Kate's voice cracked. "We thought you were dead." For the first time, Harry looked slightly uncomfortable, but Haley stepped forward before he could respond. "Honestly, this is exactly the drama we're talking about. They're grown men. You can't keep treating them like children." Kate stared at the stranger wearing the engagement ring she hadn't even known existed. "I am his mother," Haley gave a small shrug. "And today is supposed to be about our future, with people who actually matter." I saw the words hit Kate. Harry said nothing. That silence told me more than defending Haley ever could. I looked at my oldest son. "Are you going to let her speak to your mother like that?" He rubbed his forehead. "Dad, please don't start." "I'm not starting anything. I'm asking you a question. This is our engagement party. You're already making it about yourselves." Darren nodded. "Exactly." Then Harry said the words I would remember long after every other detail of that hallway faded. "Just stay on your own, Dad. Both of you. Let us live our lives. Stay on your own." I looked past him into the apartment, the view over Biscayne Bay, the catered food, the champagne, the expensive furniture inside a home my credit still supported. They wanted independence while standing on foundations they couldn't yet carry themselves. I could have pointed that out. I didn't. Then Haley gestured toward the elevators. "Can you please leave? You're ruining the party." Kate lowered her eyes. 28 years beside me had taught her when I was about to explode. But this time, there was nothing to stop. I wasn't angry anymore. I was clear. I looked at Harry, then Darren. "You want us to leave you alone?" Harry nodded. "Yes." "Completely?" Darren answered this time. "That's what we've been saying." I squeezed Kate's hand. "All right." Harry blinked, perhaps expecting an argument. I gave him none. I turned toward the elevator with my wife beside me. Behind us, the music began rising again before we'd even reached the end of the hallway. I pressed the button and watched the apartment door close in the reflection of the polished wall. My sons believed they had finally freed themselves from an overprotective father. What they hadn't considered was how much of the life behind that door still depended on the man they had just told to stay on his own. The elevator doors closed, cutting off the music from Harry's engagement party, but Kate kept staring at the narrowing gap as if she expected our son to run after us. He didn't. The last thing I saw was Haley turning back toward the guests while Harry remained beside her. Then the doors sealed and silence swallowed us. Kate's hand was still inside mine, but it had gone cold. 28 years, she whispered. I looked at her. What? 28 years raising them, Gary, and we just got thrown out of our son's engagement party like strangers. I wanted to tell her Harry would regret it, that Darren didn't mean what he'd said, that everything would look different tomorrow. For once, I refused to comfort my wife with promises I couldn't guarantee. When we reached the lobby, Kate walked past the valet without speaking. I collected the navigator and drove away from Brickell. Neither of us suggested a hotel. Neither wanted to spend another night in Miami. We changed our flights and headed back to the airport. Halfway there, Kate suddenly reached into her purse. She pulled out a small velvet pouch I had seen before but hadn't thought about in years. "I brought this because I was scared," she said. From the pouch, she removed an old gold ring set with a small diamond. I recognized it immediately. It had belonged to her grandmother. "You've had that forever. My mother gave it to me when Harry was 10. Kate turned the ring between her fingers. "She told me to keep it until he found the woman he wanted to spend his life with." I glanced at her, then back at the road. "You brought it to Miami?" She nodded. "When we decided to come, I put it in my purse. I thought if something really had happened to him." Her voice broke. She waited before continuing. "And then when I saw the balloons, for one stupid second, I thought maybe we'd arrived for something happy. I thought he'd tell us he was engaged, introduce us properly, and I'd finally give this to her." She closed her fingers around the ring. 20 years, Gary. I kept it for 20 years, and I didn't even know there was someone to give it to. That was the moment my anger changed. Harry and Darren had hurt me, but I could survive being called controlling. What I couldn't dismiss was the woman beside me, quietly putting a 20-year-old family heirloom back into her purse, because our son had decided his mother didn't belong in his future. At the airport, Kate barely spoke. During the flight home, she stared through the window while I replayed every moment in that hallway. Harry admitting he had watched our calls. Darren mocking me for flying down. Haley telling us the party was for people who mattered. And my son standing there while their mother was humiliated. We landed in Cleveland late. By the time we reached our house in Shaker Heights, exhaustion had replaced anger. I carried the bags inside while Kate walked ahead of me. She made it only a few steps into the living room. Her purse slipped from her shoulder. Then her knees gave way. "Kate." I dropped everything and reached her as she sank onto the carpet. She wasn't injured. She simply folded into herself and began crying with a force I had never heard from her in 28 years of marriage. I sat beside her and pulled her against me. "I don't understand," she kept saying. "What did we do to make them hate us this much?" "They don't hate you." "Then why didn't Harry want me there?" I had no answer. She cried until her breathing became uneven, and I held her while something inside me broke with her. For years, whenever Harry or Darren struggled, my instinct had been immediate. Fix it. Pay the bill. Make the call. Sign the document. Remove the obstacle. I had always called that love. Sitting on the floor with my wife, I began wondering whether all that rescuing had taught our sons something very different, that no matter how they treated us, Gary and Kate Cooper would always remain beneath them, holding up the life they wanted. Kate finally lifted her head. Her eyes were red. Maybe we gave them too much. I didn't answer. She looked at me. "You gave them everything you never had, Gary. Maybe that's the problem. They never had to learn what any of it costs." For the first time that night, I stopped thinking about what my sons had done and started thinking about what Kate and I had allowed. And somewhere between Miami and that living room floor, the question inside me changed. I was no longer asking how I could make Harry and Darren understand how badly they had hurt us. I was asking what would happen if, for once in their adult lives, I stopped protecting them from the full weight of their own choices. I stayed on the living room floor with Kate until her breathing finally slowed. The house was completely silent, but my mind wasn't. I kept seeing Harry holding that drink, Darren folding his arms, Haley's ring catching the light, and the apartment door closing while the party continued without us. Where did we go wrong? I asked quietly. Kate wiped her face. You think we went wrong because we loved them? I gave them everything I never had. Saying it aloud made the truth harder to avoid. My father died when I was young. There had been no safety net afterward, no person waiting to solve the next crisis. When Harry and Darren were born, I made myself a promise. My sons would never know that kind of insecurity. When Harry needed help qualifying for the Miami apartment, I guaranteed it. When his business needed stronger backing, assets connected to Anvil Biomed helped support the credit line. When Darren wanted the Jeep but couldn't secure favorable financing alone, my name strengthened the loan. Every time one of them stumbled, I stepped underneath before they could hit the ground. I thought that's what a father was supposed to do, I said. Kate looked at me for a long moment. You protected them from hardship, Gary. Maybe you also protected them from understanding what things cost. I didn't like hearing it, but I knew she wasn't talking only about money. Harry believed the apartment was his because he lived there. Darren believed the Jeep was his because he drove it. Neither thought about the signature, credit, collateral, or years of work quietly standing behind those things. Worse, they had begun treating my support as interference whenever I expected basic communication in return. So, what do we do? I asked. Kate picked up the velvet pouch from where her purse had fallen and slipped her grandmother's ring back inside. We stopped confusing help with obligation. That sentence stayed with me. I stood and helped her onto the sofa. I don't want revenge. Neither do I. I don't want to take anything that belongs to them. Then don't. Kate's voice was steadier now. Just stop giving them what belongs to us. I looked at her. For 28 years, major decisions involving the boys had usually followed the same pattern. One of them had a problem. I found a solution. Kate worried I was doing too much, and eventually we helped anyway. Tonight was different. If we do this, I said, we do it together. She nodded immediately. Together. I went into my office and opened the folder where I kept records of the guarantees and financial arrangements connected to both sons. I wasn't looking for weapons. I wanted to know where my responsibility ended and theirs began. Harry's lease renewal was first. The deadline was approaching, and my guarantee would need to continue for him to remain under the same terms. I stared at my signature on the old paperwork. Less than 24 hours earlier, Harry had looked me in the eye and said, "Stay on your own, Dad." Fine. If he wanted independence, I would stop standing invisibly beneath it. Then I found the documents connected to his business credit line and Darren's vehicle financing. I didn't cancel anything. I didn't move money. I didn't touch accounts that belonged to them. I simply made a list of every place where my name, my credit, or my assets were carrying obligations for two adult men who had just demanded that I remove myself from their lives. Kate appeared in the doorway. How much is tied to them? More than they realize. Do they know? I shook my head. I don't think they've ever had to know. She came beside me and placed her hand on my shoulder. Then maybe it's time they learn. I closed the folder. It was nearly 4 a.m. I wasn't going to make decisions while angry and exhausted. But for the first time since Miami, I knew exactly what I would do when morning came. I would call Paul Hopper, the attorney who had handled my business and estate matters for years. I would ask him one simple question. How do I legally remove myself from every financial obligation my sons have told me they no longer need? I looked at Kate. 8 o'clock. What happens at 8? I call Paul. She squeezed my shoulder. And then I thought about Harry's final words at the apartment and answered quietly. Then we give our sons exactly what they asked for. At 8:02 the next morning, I called Paul Hopper, the attorney who had handled my business affairs for nearly 15 years. I need to remove my name from several financial obligations, I told him. Paul immediately asked if I was trying to punish Harry and Darren. No, I don't touch anything that belongs to them. I don't freeze accounts, take property, or interfere with their money. I only stop using mine to support them. I explained what happened in Miami. 3 days of ignored calls, the engagement party, and Harry telling Kate and me to stay on our own. Paul was quiet for a moment. All right, what are we looking at? I opened the folder on my desk. Harry's apartment came first. His luxury lease in Brickell was approaching renewal, and I was still the guarantor. Am I required to renew? No. Then notify them that I won't. Paul made a note. Next was Harry's business credit line. Years earlier, when his company was struggling to qualify for financing, assets connected to Anvil Biomed had helped strengthen the collateral behind it. Harry called the business his own, and legally, it was. But part of the financial foundation beneath it still belonged to me. Can my collateral be removed? I asked. With proper notice, yes. The bank will reassess the facility afterward. Then start the process. I don't want his company damaged. I simply don't want my assets guaranteeing it anymore. Darren's Jeep was next. My name had helped him secure financing on terms he couldn't obtain alone. Again, I told Paul to remove my involvement wherever the contract legally allowed and provide no future guarantee. Paul finally asked, "Gary, do they understand what will happen when these protections disappear?" I looked toward Kate, who was standing in the doorway. "No," I said. "That's part of the problem. They've never had to understand." Kate walked into the office and sat beside me. For years, whenever one of our sons struggled, I had stepped in before the consequences reached him. A deposit, a signature, a guarantee, a phone call. I had always called it helping. Now I could see how easily help had become expectation. "Do you want to warn them first?" Paul asked. I thought about Harry staring at me from his apartment doorway. "Stay on your own, Dad, both of you. Let us live our lives." "No, they asked me to step out. I'm stepping out." Paul began preparing the paperwork. There was no dramatic revenge plan, no secret transfer of money. I wasn't taking a dollar from either son. I was simply separating their adult lives from the credit, assets, and signatures of the father they said was too involved. By noon, the first notices were being processed. I went to Anvil Biomed and worked the rest of the day as usual. Yet something inside me had changed. Every instinct told me to call Harry and explain what was coming. I didn't. If I warned him and then solved the problem for him, nothing would change. That evening, Kate and I ate dinner quietly. "Are you having second thoughts?" she asked. "Every 5 minutes." "Me too." I looked at her. "Then why does this still feel necessary?" Kate reached across the table. "Because loving them doesn't mean carrying them forever." At 9:14, my phone lit up. "Harry." I watched it ring until it stopped. Seconds later, a message appeared. "Dad, did you do something with my lease?" Then another, "Call me, now." I didn't answer. A third message arrived minutes later. "This is serious." I placed the phone face down. Kate looked at me. "Tomorrow?" "Tomorrow," I said. Because Harry had finally received the first small taste of the independence he demanded in Miami, what he didn't know yet was that the apartment was only the first place where my name had quietly been holding up his life. Harry called again at 7:11 the next morning. This time I answered. "Dad, I need you to fix the lease." There was no greeting, no apology, just the familiar assumption that a problem had appeared and I would remove it. "What's wrong with it?" I asked. "You know what's wrong. They won't renew without your guarantee. Haley and I have 30 days to qualify or move. Then qualify." Silence. "I can't, under their requirements." "Then find an apartment you can afford on your own." His voice sharpened. "You're really going to make us move because of what happened in Miami?" "I'm not making you do anything, Harry. I'm simply not signing another lease." He accused me of using money to control him. I almost smiled at the contradiction. 2 days ago, you said my involvement was suffocating. Now you're angry because I'm no longer involved. That's different. Why? He had no answer. Finally, he said, "Haley thinks you're trying to destroy our future. Your future shouldn't depend on my signature." I could hear him breathing hard. "Dad, please." That word almost broke me. For 30 years, Harry asking for help had been enough to make me act. I looked across the kitchen at Kate. She didn't shake her head or tell me what to do. She simply waited. "I'm sorry you're dealing with this," I said, "but I'm not renewing the guarantee." I ended the call before instinct could defeat judgment. The apartment, however, was only the beginning. That afternoon, Harry called again, and this time panic had replaced anger. His bank had contacted him about the credit facility supporting his business. With my collateral being withdrawn, the lender wanted updated financial statements and additional security. "They're freezing part of my credit line," he said. "I have payroll next week." "Then talk to your banker. They want collateral I don't have." "Then you built a business around collateral that wasn't yours." He went silent. "You told me that support was temporary," I reminded him. "That was years ago." "Exactly." Harry's voice dropped. "If this company fails, that's on you. That one hurt, but I didn't accept it. No. If your company cannot operate without my assets, then we should have dealt with that years ago." Before evening, Darren called. "What the hell are you doing?" Apparently, his lender had contacted him as well. My involvement in his Jeep financing was being reviewed, and any future refinancing would have to stand on his own credit. You dragged me into this because you're mad at Harry. No, Darren. You stood in that apartment and told me you wanted me out of your life too. I meant emotionally, not financially. The sentence was so revealing that neither of us spoke for several seconds. Listen to what you just said, I finally replied. You wanted your father gone, but you wanted his credit to stay. Darren immediately tried to take it back. I didn't argue. I'm not taking your Jeep. I'm not touching your bank account. I'm not taking $1 from you. I'm simply not carrying obligations that belong to you anymore. So this is revenge. No, this is separation. He hung up on me. Over the next several days, the calls multiplied. Harry couldn't replace my collateral quickly enough to satisfy the bank. The apartment he and Haley had chosen because it projected success suddenly became a luxury they couldn't comfortably support. Darren discovered that independence looked different when lenders evaluated only Darren instead of Darren plus Gary Cooper. Kate watched me struggle each time the phone rang. You want to help them, she said one evening. More than anything, then remember what happened when helping became automatic. I remembered Harry's doorway. I remembered Darren laughing at us for flying 1,000 miles. Most of all, I remembered Kate on our living room floor holding a ring she had saved for 20 years. So I did nothing. A week later, Harry sent me a photograph. Cardboard boxes were stacked across the apartment floor. His message contained only 4 words. Hope you're happy now. I stared at it for a long time before typing back. I'm not happy, Harry. I'm just no longer pretending your life is my responsibility. I never sent it. I deleted the message and put the phone away. 3 days later, Kate looked through the front window and called my name. A rental truck had stopped outside our house. Behind it was Darren's Jeep. Harry climbed out first. Darren stepped out behind him. They had driven 18 hours from Miami, and judging by the way both of them marched toward our front door, they hadn't come home to apologize. Harry reached the front door before Darren had even finished locking the Jeep. I opened it before he could knock. 18 hours on the road had done nothing to cool his anger. Are you happy now? He demanded. Behind him, Darren stood beside the rental truck with his arms folded. You got what you wanted, Dad. Harry lost the apartment. His business is barely functioning. My financing is screwed up. Congratulations. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. Your mother is inside. Lower your voices. Harry laughed bitterly. Now you're worried about Mom? That nearly ended my patience. Don't use your mother as a weapon after what you did to her in Miami. His face tightened. We made one mistake. 3 days wasn't one mistake. Watching your mother call while you deliberately ignored her wasn't one mistake. Letting a woman she'd never met tell her she didn't belong at your engagement party wasn't one mistake. Harry looked away. Darren stepped forward. Fine. We handled it badly. Does that justify destroying everything? What exactly did I destroy? Neither answered immediately. I continued. Did I take Harry's company? No. Did I empty either of your bank accounts? Silence. Did I repossess your Jeep, Darren? No. But did I take $1 that belonged to either of you? Harry snapped. You knew what would happen when you pulled your support. Yes. I knew you would finally have to carry expenses that belonged to you. Harry's anger cracked. Dad, I couldn't qualify for that apartment without you. Then it wasn't an apartment you could afford independently. My business needed that credit line. Then your business wasn't as independent as you told yourself. Darren shook his head. This is revenge. No. Revenge would be me taking something from you because I wanted you to suffer. I haven't taken anything. I've stopped giving. The front door opened behind me. Kate stepped onto the porch. Harry immediately turned toward her. Mom, please tell him this has gone far enough. For years, that would have worked. Harry knew Kate hated conflict. He expected her to soften me. Instead, she stood beside me. Your father and I made these decisions together. Harry stared at her. You agreed to this? Yes. After everything we've been through? Kate's expression changed. What you've been through? Her voice remained quiet, which made the words hit harder. Harry, I spent 3 days believing you might be lying dead somewhere. Your father and I flew nearly 1,000 miles because neither of our sons could send 3 words. We are fine. Then I discovered you were celebrating your engagement and had deliberately excluded us. Harry opened his mouth. Kate stopped him. I carried my grandmother's ring for 20 years because I wanted to give it to the woman you married. I brought it to Miami in my purse. Do you know where it is now? Harry said nothing. Back in my dresser. Darren looked toward the driveway. For the first time since arriving, neither son seemed angry enough to speak. I looked at both of them. You said you wanted your own lives. You have them. But adulthood doesn't mean your father disappears from your decisions while his signature stays beneath your debts. Harry's shoulders dropped. So what are we supposed to do? It was the same question he'd asked on the phone. This time I answered differently. Build something you can actually carry. From nothing? Darren asked. Not from nothing. You have education, health, experience, jobs, and each other. What you don't have anymore is automatic rescue. Harry looked toward the rental truck filled with the possessions from his Miami apartment. And if I lose the company? The father in me wanted to say I would never let that happen. I swallowed the words. Then you learn why it failed and decide what comes next. Harry stared at me for several seconds. You've changed. I had to. Darren gave a bitter laugh. Because of one party? Kate answered before I could. No. Because that party showed us what our help had become. Silence settled across the porch. Finally, Harry asked, Can we stay here tonight? I looked at Kate. She looked back at me. This was the line between cruelty and boundaries. We weren't going to leave our sons sleeping in a truck just to prove a point. One night, I said. You're our sons, and this will always be your family home. But tomorrow you start making your own arrangements. Harry nodded reluctantly. Darren said nothing. As they began unloading overnight bags, Kate touched my hand. I knew the hardest part wasn't over. Removing my name from their finances had been simple paperwork. Removing the expectation that everything I built would eventually become theirs would require something much bigger. And the next morning I called Paul Hopper again, not about an apartment, a credit line, or a Jeep. This time, I wanted to talk about our estate. The morning after Harry and Darren left, I called Paul Hopper again. I want to change the trust. He was silent for a moment. Because of what happened in Miami? Because Miami showed me something I should have understood years ago. Kate sat across from me when Paul arrived that afternoon. I wanted her involved in every decision. This wasn't my revenge, and it wasn't my money alone. It was the result of 28 years we had spent building a life together. Paul opened the existing estate documents. Under the old structure, if I died first, Kate received everything. If Kate died first, everything passed to me. After both of us were gone, most of the estate eventually flowed to Harry and Darren. Anvil Biomed. Investments, property, the accumulated value of nearly 3 decades of work. What do you want changed? Paul asked. Kate remains protected completely. So do I if she goes first. I paused. But after we're both gone, Harry and Darren receive nothing. Paul looked directly at me. 0? 0. Kate didn't flinch. We'd already discussed it. Paul leaned back. Gary, that's a significant decision. I need to know you're not doing this while angry. If I wanted to hurt them, I would have done it last week. This isn't about hurting them. I explained what had been bothering me since the night Kate collapsed. My sons had spent their adult lives assuming that whatever I built would eventually become theirs. Maybe I had encouraged that assumption every time I solved a problem before they felt its weight. Leaving them millions after spending the rest of my life trying to teach them independence would make the lesson meaningless. Then where does the estate go? Paul asked. I already knew. Scholarships. Kate looked at me and smiled faintly. For military families? I nodded. My father had died when I was young, and I remembered what it meant to grow up knowing there would never be another phone call, another piece of advice, another person quietly standing behind you. I wanted the money to help children of service members who had died, young people who weren't rejecting a father's support because they found it inconvenient, but who had lost that support forever. Paul began taking notes. The trust would fund education, vocational training, and other opportunities for those families after Kate and I were gone. Harry and Darren would receive no inheritance from the estate. Saying it aloud didn't make me feel powerful. It made me sad. These were still my sons. I still loved them. But love didn't require me to reward entitlement from beyond the grave. Kate reached across the table and took my hand. "Are you sure?" I asked her. "Completely." Paul looked between us. "Then I'll prepare the amendments." After he left, I stood at the window watching the empty driveway. Part of me wondered whether Harry and Darren would someday discover the change and call it one final punishment. Maybe they would, but I no longer needed them to agree with every boundary I set. The inheritance had once been my final safety net beneath them. Now, it would become something else. A chance for children who had lost a parent to build futures of their own. I squeezed Kate's hand. "They wanted their lives to belong to them." She nodded. "Now they do." And for the first time, I understood that my legacy didn't have to be measured by how much money my sons received after I died. It could be measured by what the life Kate and I built was still able to do for people who truly needed a hand. 6 months later, our house was quieter than it had been in years, but for the first time, the silence didn't frighten me. Harry had moved into a modest apartment outside Miami and was rebuilding his business with a smaller credit line he qualified for himself. Darren traded the Jeep for something he could comfortably afford and stopped calling every time a bill surprised him. Neither transformation happened gracefully. There were angry messages, weeks without contact, and moments when I nearly picked up the phone and offered to fix everything. Each time, I remembered Kate sitting on our living room floor with her grandmother's ring in her hand, asking what we had done wrong. Slowly, something changed. Harry began calling without asking for money. Sometimes he only wanted to tell his mother about work. Darren called me once because his car needed repairs. I waited for him to ask for help. Instead, he said, "Don't worry, Dad. I already figured it out." Those words meant more to me than any apology. Kate and I never told them about the trust. That decision wasn't meant to frighten them into behaving better. What happened after our deaths belonged to the future. What mattered now was whether we could build a relationship that wasn't held together by my wallet. One evening, Kate and I sat on the porch, watching the sun disappear behind the trees. She brought 2 cups of coffee and sat beside me. "Do you miss the old days?" she asked. "Which old days?" "When the boys needed us for everything." I thought about it. "Sometimes," she smiled. Me too. For most of my life, I had measured fatherhood by how useful I could make myself. My own father had disappeared from my life through death, so I had spent decades terrified my sons would ever feel abandoned. I had answered every emergency, signed every document, and built safety nets beneath problems they should sometimes have been allowed to solve themselves. Somewhere along the way, I forgot that raising children wasn't supposed to make them dependent on your rescue forever. It was supposed to prepare them for the day they didn't need it. I reached for Kate's hand. 28 years earlier, she had chosen to build a life with me when Anvil Biomed was little more than an idea, and our bank account barely survived each month. She had stayed through long nights, failed contracts, raising 2 boys, and every mistake I made while trying to become the father I never had. Yet, when Harry and Darren demanded independence, I had nearly forgotten the person who had never demanded anything except that we face life together. "I'm sorry," I said. Kate looked at me. "For what?" "For spending so many years trying to make sure the boys never left that I forgot to appreciate who stayed." Her eyes softened. She squeezed my hand. "I'm still here. I know." That was enough. I didn't hate my sons. I didn't celebrate their struggles. Harry and Darren had their own lives now, and whether those lives became successful would finally depend on the choices they made rather than the obstacles I removed. Maybe one day we would become close again. Maybe some wounds would always remain. I could live with either possibility. Because what happened in Miami had taught me something I should have understood much earlier. Love isn't proved by how much disrespect you're willing to finance. And setting a boundary isn't the same as abandoning someone. Kate rested her head against my shoulder as the porch lights came on. Inside the house, my phone remained silent. This time, I didn't check it. I looked at the woman beside me and finally felt peaceful. My boys had their own lives now. Kate and I had ours. And after 28 years of trying to give everyone else everything they needed, I finally understood that what remained between us was more than enough.